Welcome to the Business of Travel, the official podcast of the Global Business Travel Association. I'm Annette Cumming, and I'm representing the GBTA Technology Committee, and I'll be your host today for today's episode. I'm honored to be here today with Lisa Caswell, a former software CEO. Lisa brings firsthand perspective into the demands facing leaders today and advises small enterprises to multinationals on disruptive technologies, as well as identifying the types of executives who will have a lasting impact to their organization. She believes in the transformative power of leadership and works with organizations from private equity and venture capital firms to Fortune 100 tech companies, as well as industrial players to recruit CEOs, board directors, and C-level tech and product executives. Thanks for being here.
Thank you so much, Annette, for having me. And this is, as you know, a topic we've been brainstorming for some time. And so I'm delighted to be able to have a conversation with you about it.
Yeah, it's a fantastic topic. It ties into some of our last conversations in the Women in Tech around sponsors and mentors, but this is really taking it to a whole new level. So for the people listening today, can you talk about what does it mean to keep the ladder down?
Absolutely. We've been at this journey for quite a long time to find our place and to get in positions, whether it's executive positions or CEOs or board positions. And there's been, of course, a lot of momentum recently to add to the collective of underrepresented members. And so keeping the ladder down comes in two fronts. One, it's when we get to any of our next levels, what are we doing to make sure that things that we learned along the way, either that we'd like to change or also do for others what was done for us to give us those opportunities. And yes, while we absolutely work our, backsides off to actually make it happen, there are people around us that actually help make it happen as well when we get to these, higher roles and positions within companies. And so it's very important for us to be very purposeful about how we do that. And yes, it's great to sponsor women's or diversity initiatives in the companies, but it's also what do you do individually to keep that ladder down? When you get a phone call for something that you might like but don't have the space for, who's your list of people that you're recommending as potentials that may or may not have the right titles today, but you absolutely know can do the work and can step up to that. But don't overshoot them into something that they really can't do. So you've got to be really mindful of it, but it's keeping that active list ready in addition to the participatory events.
Right. Yeah. And we've all gotten those phone calls. Right, because hiring and finding the right people is not easy. You're putting a lot of faith into people you bring into the organizations, and that recommendation from other people really means a lot. I think it sometimes is undervalued how much your network who believes in you can impact, to your point, your next journey. Can you talk a little bit about how do you curate your list? What are your defining attributes of a person to make it to the Lisa list?
I'm in sort of a unique position today, obviously, as executive recruiting is part of my business. So making my list, I just get a lot more opportunities to add people to the list. But when I think about people that are calling, as an example, when I step out of the executive search role, think of people that are calling me, back for operating roles or things of that nature, and they want the like me folks. It really is thinking from multiple aspects, and it is people in my own organizations who I've worked with. I've seen their work. They've also, mentioned, career aspirations, right? So I know where they want to go, because you also want to make sure you're putting people up that want to, step into these roles. And you can't just assume that that's the case, right? Not everybody wants to go from 40, 60-hour week to an 80-hour week, which is what some positions may require. So like really knowing the individuals. And then it's actually thinking really creatively about that, of where I've met people that I've thought, and sometimes they've been at customers, sometimes they've been partners, sometimes it's just through, association or event type of thing. But I make the time to go back and get to know them and understand, the things that they've done that have been successful. You have to make the list because not only do I think that they're great, but I also know that other people will also speak very highly of these certain capabilities, that we can do that. And so it's yes, I think this person is great, but I happen to know there are 3 other people who also think that they're great. And this does not have to be a long list. This is a list of 5 or 10 people that you're sort of just constantly keeping, but it's also keeping in touch with them through the years. So it's not putting them on, and you just there has to be a bit of recency to it.
Oh yeah, life changes. Right.
Yeah.
So, I heard someone speak the other day who said, what's important to me at 35 is different than when I'm 40, as an example. Right. So people's lives changes. And if they're on the list today, maybe there comes a point where they want just different things. Right. And the only way you know that is to stay in touch with them. Because we're talking about women in tech and leadership roles, in your experience, what do you find to be really kind of that key attribute for women in technology leadership roles to kind of to take it to that next level? Is there one or a couple that they really, I'd love for our audience to kind of take that away of, here's something Lisa sees a lot as a success factor.
Yeah. So I think, and it's so funny because it's a little counter to a bit of what we've been trained to do of late, which is, speak your own voice, be your own advocate, charge for yourself. And that puts a very I-centric world in front of us. I've done this. I've been able to do this. I made this happen. I did this. And while it is great, I think the greatest differentiator are those that are also enablers for others, those where it's always still part of the team. And it's a really fine balance between owning it and, making that claim to, proudest things are, yes, this and what I got my team to do, right? What we were able to pull together. Big moments are, keeping the ladder down. How diverse is your whole organization in thought, in culture, in everything else that you actually live every single day to prove that it's a multicultural, environment that you're actually able to inspire a lot of different, types of individuals and get stuff done, right? And have really hardcore results behind it. So strong metrics, knowing your metrics, not being fluffy about it. Anybody who even hesitates when I ask about financials numbers or what was your growth, and if I don't care what gender it is, if you even so much as hesitate, okay, we're not on top of our business. And those are not things to say, let me get back to you on. It's fine to do that in some situations, and those it's not. So I really think being able to describe what you're doing, yes, taking some ownership of it, but recognizing that and making sure that this is in fact what you've done, is that you've got a team that you're able to do that, because an organization is nothing other than a high performing team.
Right. It's almost like you got your keeping the ladder down list, but the people you're looking at have their own, right? It's because that makes good leaders.
And you want to inspire them to do exactly that and to think broadly, right? I am very much an advocate of making sure that my list is not just women, that it's Black, it's Latin, right? You've heard me get on soapboxes, especially in the state of California, that we've got a 51%, I think, Latin population, and less than 1% sit on boards of public companies, and I think a less than 3% are on management teams. Like, what are we doing? And it's also just not finding them at the top. That ladder has to go all the way to the bottom and give people steps up along the way, because we've got to bring them along from coming out of college, right? The number of people that take those informational interviews with the kids that are coming out of college that want to learn. So they get into the right roles to start with, right? And just, you've got to make time all the way along, down the path. And I think that's incredibly important, and think broader than sort of our own personal stereotype.
Right. That's great advice. From your perspective, and for the audience who's listened to our series before, we've talked about mentoring and sponsoring. Where do you, if I'm a person who wants to build my ladder list, right, and keeping the ladder down, where does that fall into mentor sponsor? Is it part of? Does it come after? Where have you found this activity to be the most effective for people you've gotten to know?
I think the list of people that frankly you're sponsoring. I think mentoring, and this is a very personal thing. So everybody's got to be their own judge, and I would encourage you to do this. I think mentoring sort of steps to the side where I'm there for you regardless, right? I want to know when you put up, I'm going to be that reference when somebody calls to do that potentially, but I'm there to be your sounding board, sort of lights, looking around corners, reflective listening. Mentor doesn't necessarily mean that ownership, because it's a different level of responsibility of, I think, that goes into a mentorship that lasts, longer. And I think the sponsorship is the thing that can get you to go forward. And they're not necessarily mutually exclusive. I literally yesterday talked to the gentleman who enabled me to get my CEO job. And, he is my funny lean in moment where I wanted to write to Cheryl and tell her she needed a new chapter in her book, because it was, I'd asked so many times for the opportunity, and he said no every time. Like, no, you don't need this. No, I don't believe in this position. No, you don't do this. And I thought, oh my God, and this guy likes me. Like, hey, I know it. We work together. And he was my mentor without being my formal mentor. It was through learnership. But what he really was my sponsor. And so when they asked, this is who we're thinking about putting in for CEO, he was the one that said, you need to consider Lisa, but without telling me. Right. And when you keep your list, you don't need to tell people they're on your list. Just own and do the list. So I really think the list is sponsorship and keeping it up. And I think mentoring happens differently. But that, again, that doesn't mean that they're mutually exclusive, because mine ended up being one and the same.
Yeah. And typically people who end up in being either a sponsor or having someone sponsor them probably did have some mentorship in their past, right? Because it's having that focus and determination to grow, and mentorship is a great way to do that, right? To get to that point. And I think in some of my conversations with other women, and just in my industry, and I've asked this question many times, did you have a sponsor? Have you had one? And many women raised their hand and said, I did, but I didn't know it. So your point of, they don't always know until you get that call. You're like, how did this happen? And it's because somebody was your cheerleader and in a sponsorship way. But I love what you talk about. It's really taking sponsorship to a whole nother level, because you're actively curating people you believe in. Yeah. Right. And being mindful of it.
And looking for them, right? I think that was the other point. I was talking to a fabulous woman that I placed as a CEO, and she happens to be Black, and she's getting calls all day long, right? For boards, for CEO stuff, for everything. And just, I think the poor woman might want to change her phone number. And she's like, what's the issue? And, am I getting these calls strictly because of these things? And, I said, she's got a unique combination of like 5 of the top things that people ask for. She's got tech, she's been a CEO, she's Black, she's female, and wildly successful, and a great leader. But we said it's a pipeline problem. And so you actually have to go look for those, right? I've got, and I've seen different, I've seen different women, I've seen different, leaders of colors. I've got another gentleman who I worked with, like he was a business partner of mine years ago, and he keeps a curated spreadsheet of people, and it's everything from kids coming out of Georgia Tech, for which he keeps an eye on, to people that he's met, to people that he's worked with, and he makes sure it's sort of balanced across all of those. And so when I call and I say, I need X, Y, and Z, Z, I'm looking for this person, who do you have? It's like, oh, hold on a second. And he goes, and it's a pretty broad list, but it's probably 12 to 15 people for him, but he keeps it very updated. And I've had others that I've seen him hold spreadsheets of women, and it is just that. It's just keeping that. And it's funny when you talk to folks that you're taking on that sponsorship role can go both directions. When people see you do it, even leaders above you that see you do, they're like, I hadn't thought about that. Maybe I should do that. And you can actually inspire in both directions and see what that does.
It's about giving back. And I think we all have our own way of giving back. One that just fits who we are, what our own personality, but also our bandwidth and our time. So can you talk about how that part fits into your life? Now you do recruit, and that's a key part of what you do. But if if that wasn't your day job and you were thinking about this, how much time does it take if somebody wants to actually start to really procure a list?
I think it's very funny on where it can do, because I used to do this before I got into this function. And I think I got into this because the person that brought me here knew that I did this in my normal. And for me, it happens on the jump. And it happened for me sitting on the sidelines of my girls playing soccer, where your parents, you're sitting there for 4 to 20 hours over a weekend, it feels like, and understanding what other parents do. I ended up spending an inordinate amount of time with some of these people that were in different fields. I had biochemists, right, that were amazing. And I sort of got to learn what they did and some of the things they were taking on. And IoT experts in this area, and actually a headhunter, somebody who is a recruiter for the healthcare field. And I'm like, okay, these people go on a list in a different way. And it's not always in my function, but don't keep it just in your train of field. If they are great leaders, people in their field that you can do it, they can come up anyway, and just keep note of them. And they may again fall. So if you lose touch with them because the kids have moved to a different league and stuff like that, unless you purposely want to do that, that takes extra time. But it can actually just be a part of what you do. This isn't necessarily go out and seek. The biggest thing is once you put them on the list, do keep a tickler that once every 6 months, you should be touching base with them if you're not seeing it because of what your day to day is, and checking in with that.
Yeah. That's not time consuming, right? I mean, you're not.
For me, it was half an hour and you bang out 5 phone calls, right? And you sort of get back to it, and that's what it is.
So when you think about, I love that example of just meeting people at the game and getting to know them, what's the one thing you see in people that you have now been able to identify as a really key success factor to moving on, or just even within their own fields? Is there one thing that you see in people?
I don't know that there's one thing. I think learning agility and curiosity might be and how that manifests itself in their lives, and in their, both personally and professionally, but more professionally, what does that mean? That is probably one of the greatest single tracks that I see in that, because if they've got a curiosity about their teams, they've got a curiosity about the market, they're willing to listen when they're talking, give and take, and probably only second to that is communication skills, right? And it's something I frankly have had to work extraordinarily hard on. And I'm pretty sure if anybody on this podcast sees me, they're like, oh yeah, it's been something. And communication skills is not just how you articulate, it is how you listen and how you reflect on what you're hearing as part of that. But that's why it falls in a little bit into that curiosity, because if you have an innate curiosity, you will listen more.
Yes.
To
Yes.
what somebody's going to say. And it's very hard for people in our industries, right? Like they're extraordinarily intelligent and smart. And sometimes like, oh my God, I always have the answer ahead of somebody else. That part's not me, by the way. But it's hard to not want to jump in. It's hard not to lead the witness. It's hard not to do these things. And I think it's probably those two things, is that incredible curiosity, and it could be about the world, the market. It creates great new products. It's oh my gosh, how can I get like this amazing team, and craft this group. A curiosity about how do you keep things fresh, right, for your people, right? A curiosity of when do I push, when do I pull, right? And as a leadership, but also being able to communicate. And communication wraps up empathy, it wraps up listening skills, it wraps up quick, concise, clear, communications.
Right.
Unless you're a phenomenal orator and can go on and people want to listen to you.
That's a great observation. You've seen so much, right, in your career, and it's great for our audience to hear, what kind of stands out for you. And then, if you take that to the next level, it's articulating, how did you deliver on that, on curiosity, right? How did you deliver on those skills? I wouldn't call them soft skills, but they are just somewhat who you are, right? But how you correlate that into success, I think, is another really interesting dynamic. And when we think about just the ladder in general, right? Because it's all about, at some point, to somebody, you have to show, and you have to show your work, right?
Yep.
You go back to school, right? You got to show your work.
You got to deliver at the end of the day.
You got to deliver. So how do you mesh, all of that together? I think is a really fascinating dynamic, and I think it's an evolution for all of us. Right.
Well, and I think one of the ways that you also encourage it in that ladder is, as you're talking to the folks that you think might be on the ladder, again, have your data point one or two things of things they did, like the thing that stood out for you, to put them on that list to start with. What was it? Right.
Right.
And very seldom is it just a moment in time, but it's how they conducted themselves. I watched them over 3 years grow from this to a team lead to that, right? Or this is a person that's in charge of sales, but my gosh, I've seen them, go sit on calls in the call center with folks because they want to understand the customer more, or they, take this meeting with somebody that's over in manufacturing, like in some other part of the business that they didn't know, or gosh, they sit with finance and really want to understand how finance is interpreting the stuff that they're doing. I've seen them do these things, right? So it's the things that you've seen people do that earn them to that. Again, to your point, they got to deliver. You've got to deliver, but have the hard evidence that supports sort of why they're on your list to start with as part of that. And again, this isn't a long thing. This is another cell in the Excel spreadsheet or table or in your notebook, wherever you happen to keep it, or OneNote on your phone. And, because this is not an over sophistication when you're talking about 10 to 15 people as part of that. The hardest part is oftentimes like, oh my gosh, my list is getting longer and longer and longer. And then the bar becomes, think of sort of the most aspirational person that you would envision ever having the opportunity to talk to, that might say, I can't get you, but who? And like, keep the list in there of who's on that list, and make sure that you're always sort of ready for that.
That's a great point. I've had those questions. If not you, who?
Yeah.
Right. It's really powerful. And I think everyone, it's a great way. I love that we're talking about this because it's a way to give back, and it's not overly complicated. It's quite simple, but incredibly powerful.
The number of people, if you just think about the number of people that can get exposed, that, you know, people even in my profession would never possibly have the opportunity to know, just because the world is so big, and somebody can unlock something for you in that moment. And I think we just raised the game altogether, right? The whole, I'd love for the day when the diversity thing actually becomes just a non-topic, because we're all just doing it so much that it just happens. And, you know, it doesn't have to be just for, you know, for one of these categories. I really hope that we're keeping a portion of it for, you know, again, so many men became the enablers for us in my generation, you know, to get to the spots that we got to, right? Let's not forget about them. And that at the same time, we now need to do that for the other diversity classes that haven't been at it for 30 years, 40 years like we have, right? I mean, our journey has been 40 years as women in tech trying to get this position, and we may or may not like where the results are. But darn, we're way ahead of some of the others right now. So get to know that group of people and make sure that some of that's on the list. I mean, that's also where I think we do have to make the effort.
Great point. Like, of our generation, you think it has been men. I mean, from my personal experience, it's been mostly men who have been there, right? Keeping that ladder down. But that's the generation we were in. There weren't a lot of women, right?
Right.
So we're at this pivotal point where women now, there's enough of us that we can take that step, right? And be that for other women. But yeah, don't forget the guys.
Other women, don't forget the guys, like in both directions, right? I think it's just really important, right? Is also don't forget what got you here. And it's interesting in how you continue to balance that out. But again, also look for the folks that don't look like you.
That's great advice. Great advice. Now more than ever.
I'm not buried, other than, you know, it's everywhere here in California, but I don't necessarily, you know, live in, you know, a Latin community. It's not, you know, infused in my world. So I have to make a very purposeful effort to do that. And it's so wonderful and fascinating when I do, right? I spent most of the summer in Mexico, and like what it's, you know, done, and you get purposeful about it. I have always had actually a pretty strong bias, to the Black and Brown community, across the board, because of where I grew up. And it's been something that was purposeful, that I started in high school curating that, and it has stayed with me for years.
That's wonderful. I love that word, purposeful. It says so many things, but it can mean something different.
Good interviewer and communicator. I love talking with you. You in that thoughtful response. I just have to tell you, you are a delight.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. That's so kind of you. This has been amazing just to chat, open this up to so many people to hear your story, your recommendations. You know, that's incredibly powerful, Lisa. So as we wrap things up, I'll ask you one more question. So if you had some parting words for the people listening today around whether you're a woman or a man, right? And that keeping that ladder down, what would your advice be as a next step?
Can I steal from Nike? Just do it. Just rip out the page in the notebook right now and write down 3 people. I am so sure you get 3 people, and then just start to see where this goes. This does not have to be any grand level of formality. I don't care what the notebook is, whatever your means is, just start right now. And like, before you move on to the next thing, write down 3 people. And if anybody has questions, y'all can find me on LinkedIn.
I love it. Thank you so much. I think we have a new use of Just Do It. I'm going to vote for that. I think it can apply to a lot of different things, but I love using it for this. And thank you so much, Lisa.
Thank you for the opportunity to share something that is, you can tell I'm extremely passionate about, but it's been great. And thank you for the opportunity. And thanks to your audience.
You have been listening to The Business of Travel, the official podcast of the Global Business Travel Association. For more information about GBTA and its work, visit gbta.org. And be sure to rate and review us wherever you get your podcasts. Until next time, thanks for listening.